Hi folks, John Cordisco back again. Sorry I'm a little behind on my videos. This is round 2 of Dortmund Chess 2015. Been pretty busy running my convenience store upstate, and I'm also running in a local election, so it's eating up a little bit of my time. I'm going to try to catch up pretty soon. Is going to be the Singfield Cup, one of the premier tournaments in the world right here in the United States, and I'm going to be doing a lot of coverage on that. But anyway, here's a great game from round 2 of Dortmund Chess between two big heavyweights, now both playing for the United States. Fabiano Caruana as white, formerly with the Italian Federation, now with the U.S. He's really a U.S. citizen. He had dual citizenship. And Wesley So from the Philippines, who's now playing for the U.S. Really interesting game. Let's get to it. Instead of my yakking here, it's going to be, even though it's knight to f3, it's going to end up being a Sicilian Najdorf. As you can see, it transposes. And we'll go through the opening a little bit here. We've all seen the Najdorf a couple of million times. Interesting though, d2 for the knight. Computer likes knight back to f3, and I do as well. I just don't like the fact that it blocks in the light squared bishop for white, even though the knight will probably end up on g3. b5. And here we go. g4. Here, and we're off, as they say. The typical Sicilian, where you have the pawn race on the king side. b4, knight goes to d5. Knight takes, not as good. For those of you that were wondering if knight takes pawn. Bishop g2, knight c5, knight takes b4, and white's is pretty comfortable there. What's he going to do? Move the bishop to b7, and it's not good. After knight takes, pawn takes, h5. Gonna open it right up. Black's a little cramped, but in all fairness, white's got a pretty forward pawn on d5, but he's got one piece kind of developed on e2. Pawn takes, rook takes, a3. Now we get craziness. This is a position you don't see that often, or I've never seen it. Pawn takes, rook takes. Now we got a rook left with tempo, I might add, picking up the pawn. Now this rook can swing over and go over here. This is going to be interesting. Knight to d7, bishop g2. Reinforce that pawn. Pawn has a lot of key squares it's controlling here, especially here and here. Knight to f6. Finally, the knight gets around. White finally castles. Rook b8, f4. Now, I'm not so sure moving that pawn in front of the king, but this is Fabiano Caruana, one of the top 10 players in the world. Who might have questioned that? But I'm a little more conservative. I'd probably play queen to d3, or even swing the rook over to g3. f4 opens it right up. Bishop to e7. Get your pieces developed. c4, reinforce that forward pawn. Looking good. Even though the computer shows a small advantage for black, I like white. A lot of wide open space, and he controls a lot of the space. Queen to b6, check. Rook to f2. Rook here. This is a little awkward. This bishop has to stay there to guard the b pawn, at least for now. Rook c3. Okay. And this is where I think Wesley kind of miscues. Goes bishop to d7. It immediately goes from basically a tiny advantage for white to an almost 2-point advantage immediately. Now this you'll see a lot. When one makes a mistake, the other one does too. c5 is the computer's choice, and I agree, with a 2-point advantage for white, but he goes b3, a very human move, and just like that, it's a 2.5-point swing. It's a 2-point advantage to over 3/4 of a point advantage for black immediately. What he should have gone is c5. Then after d takes, f takes, and looking pretty grim for black there. But instead he went b3. Very rarely do you see top world-class players like this make 2 mistakes in a row. I will have to say Wesley's mistake wasn't nearly as bad as White Fabiano Caruana's mistake, but nonetheless, these guys are human. That's what happens. So let's get on with this. Bishop takes. Bishop takes. Knight d4. Give you an idea if Rook had taken. Rook takes. Bishop takes. Knight d4. And White's definitely screwed. Where's he going to go? What's he going to do? He can't move the rook. He's going to minimally lose the exchange, and then more after that, because the queen's going to have to guard that. Rook, this pawn's going to go. It's a disaster. So that was the correct move. Bishop takes. Knight d4 anyway. Queen e1, guarding both pieces. Knight takes the one on c3, which is, I think, the smart move. Keep the pin on the rook. Queen takes. Queen takes. Queen takes. Rook takes. Now this is a move I wouldn't have ever saw. It's Bishop c8. That I never would have saw, but that's a pretty good move. Now let's recap here. White has two pieces for rook and two pawns. Small advantage for black, 3/4 of a pawn. Two pieces are pretty tough to overcome. But White's pieces aren't that great shape. They're not really doing much. We'll see how this goes. e4. Here he comes with the pawns. And this is where I think Caruana miscues. I like bishop f5, to tell you the truth, go after the pawn. He takes the pawn here. And immediately bishop d7. c5. Pawn takes. Rook to g2. g6. It's still the same, but look how awkward White's pieces are. I think they're not coordinated at all. And he's having a hard time doing that. And I think this could be bad for Caruana. Rook g3, he's trying to trade down. Rook takes, knight takes. Rook to g4. Two isolated pawns. Good luck with that. King to h2. f5. Get those pawns all nice up there in the chain. You notice he has them on light-colored squares. Knight e2. Rook. We're going to go through a few moves here. They're going back and forth for a while, kind of maneuvering their pieces. King. Bishop. King. Bishop. Bishop. Moves the rook. Bishop e1. They're just maneuvering around. And these are the type of positions that's easy to miscue. White's knight really doesn't have many places to go. Where's he really going to go? When he could go in here? To here maybe? I don't know. c4. Here comes the pawn. Bishop c3. He uses the bishop as a blockader and not the knight. Rook to a8. You can also get that rook in open spaces. What good is he? And this is where I think Caruana miscues again. I don't think it's a huge miscue, but rook to b8 looks reasonable. Rook h4 I like as well. Or excuse me, coming up here, Caruana miscues. Bishop e5. Is it worth trading? He decides not to. He pins the knight. King f1, get out of that pin. Rook to d2. Bishop c3. This is starting to get complicated. Rook d3. Bishop a3. I like rook to a3 myself. Kind of keeps things tied down after bishop moves. Rook, bishop e1, and White's just in sad shape there. We decided to go bishop to a3 instead. He's trying to bring the bishop around, but what good is it? This bishop is worthless. He's got to babysit the pawn on d5. Bishop c5. King comes over. Try to get something going here. Rook to b3. King comes up. Rook checks. King has to guard the knight. Bishop. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Finally got a minor piece traded. Now Caruana is trying to hang on for dear life here. I mean, this is a tough one. He's probably trying to do the best he can to draw this, and it's going to be really hard. Still the two pieces for the rook and two pawns. King comes up. You got to get your king in the action, and king's a powerful piece in the endgame. Rook to b3, shuts him right down, brings up the knight. Got to get your pieces doing something besides just sitting there. e3, here comes the passed pawn. Rook to a3, I don't know, 6 of one, half dozen of another. Bishop, rook b6, guarding the pawn. Knight d2. You have to be careful. Everybody thinks, well, let's go here and go after these pawns. Once that king comes over, the bishop is now trapped. He can't get out. And the king will end up here, and the bishop is doomed. Rook to a6. Checks, just to get rid of the pawn. Decides to take it with a rook instead. Rook takes is the most accurate. King takes would probably be okay too, but he decided to take it with a rook, which was the right move, because now he's threatening the rook to d2 check, winning the knight. Bishop takes to guard the knight. King f6, here comes the king. Bishop d3. What he's trying to do is get rid of white's pawn, and he does here. Pawn takes, king takes, knight g3. He's thinking, well, what I can do, I don't know the rook versus minor piece ending, but I'm sure these guys do. White's just trying to hold, but it's almost a 4-point advantage. He's doomed. Rook checks. Very good technique by Wesley. King to d1, f4, Wesley So. Putting the screws. Here come the pawns. Knight to f1. Knight's a really good blockader or stopper of passed pawns. Rook. What's he going to do? He's basically stuck. King comes up. King to e1. King to g3. Knight checks. King comes over. Knight checks again. King goes to g2. Good spot. Knight goes back. Rook to e6. Here it comes. Bishop. Rook to e5. Now he wants that rook on the e-file. It's over. I won't call it posturing on Fabiano's part, but sometimes mentally and emotionally. Mentally he knows the game is over, but emotionally he hasn't reached that yet, so we'll go through a few more moves. Rook to a5. Bishop checks. King to g1. Whenever you see the opposing king on your back rank. Knight takes. And rook to e5. Penning the knight. It's over. And that's where Fabiano Caruana resigns. Hell of a game by Wesley. Pretty good technique in the rook 2 pawns versus 2 minor piece ending. Anyway, folks, that's the game from round 2. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to try to keep up on the current videos. This one's a little bit older, but I'm going to try to do the best I can between running in a local election and running my convenience store. It's been tough, and I hope to get some more in the next few days, get caught up. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for viewing, and I also want to thank all of my subscribers. Thank you very, very much. I very much appreciate it. And as I always say, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.